Good morning. You're very welcome. We begin by listening to a beautiful spiritual, deep river to introduce us.
Good morning, everybody. I will play a Negro spiritual for the deep.
You're very welcome today to this meeting on the life and faith journey of Takashi Nagai. Takashi survived the atomic bomb in Nagasaki, which killed his wife and destroyed all his belongings, along with much of the city. And we have been really moved by the way he looked at all those horrific circumstances in light also of his terminal illness that had him totally confined to bed. Despite losing everything, he held such a hope and strength that made it possible for him to say, the first thing I think every morning, as soon as I wake up, is that I am happy. And the life of a new day awaits me, true joy, the audacity of this heart that every morning sets to work again. His gaze is so amazing that we wish to share the journey of his life with as many people as possible as an opportunity to delve ourselves and all the present circumstances of our lives into it. We will be guided by Gabriele Di Comite, who is connected with us via Zoom from Tokyo. and who is going to introduce us to Tagashi's journey, and especially what made it possible for him to be such an extraordinary presence for all the people surrounding him and for his entire country. Gabriele is an Italian doctor who lives and works in Japan and loves its people and culture. He was among the organizers of an exhibition about Takashi and Midori Nagai in 2019, and then became president of the association Friends of Takashi and Midori Nagai, set up to promote the beatification process of the couple. He is translator into Italian and other languages of books by Takashi, such as What Never Dies, his autobiography written soon after the bombing, 3 years after the bombing. And we are going to show now a short video which illustrates well the horrible scenario of destruction from the nuclear bomb dropped on Nagasaki, and a smiling Tagashi in the middle of it. You can also see some of the many people who used to visit him, such as the Emperor of Japan. And this gives an idea of how crucial his experience was for the entire country. So I'm going to pass over to Gabriele then, and we'll have some time for questions afterwards. Gabriele. Hello.
Hi, hello everybody. Good morning.
Good
I hope you can hear me well.
Yeah, we can.
Good, good. Thank you very much. Well,
Please.
first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm really, really glad. So let's start this journey because there's 1 million things I would like to tell you. I will only be able to tell you 500,000. So I think we should start. Can you see the slides? Oh, sorry. No, wait. Sorry, huh? I will do it in a second. So, yeah, just a moment. Okay. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I was unsure if I should choose as a title "What Never Dies" or this sentence, "The life of a new day awaits me, true joy." I decided to choose this one because this is the end of the journey of Takashi, and this is where we want to head in our life. So I think that this is the purpose, that this is where I want to bring you. And this is not only the story of Takashi, this is actually the story of Takashi and Midori. And we will see how important is the figure of Midori, which more and more we are discovering over the time. So Takashi was born in, he's Japanese, he was born in a city which is called Shimane. Well, yeah, he was born in Matsue, sorry, which is close to the city of Shimane. I just put the map here so that you can get a bit of an idea of where we are. He, soon after being born, the family moved into a very small village in the countryside. And the picture you can see there, it's the actual home where Takashi grew for the first 12 years of his life. So he was in the countryside, in a place which was like 12 houses like this. In the picture are his father Noboru and his mother. And you can see from the picture here where Nagasaki is, so we can get a bit of an idea of, well, all the things that we are going to talk about actually happened. This is his family. So it was mother, father, and then there were 5 children. Takashi, the one indicated by the arrow, was the eldest one. And yeah, now I will show you a few pictures. I would like you to notice the eyes of Takashi, the gaze of Takashi. I'm always impressed by that. I don't know. I always have. In many pictures, he's smiling. In many pictures, you can see a sort of a nostalgia in his eyes. But what really impresses me is that he's always extremely attentive. You can see in pictures like this that other people are nicely distracted by what's happening, the sort of a party. Takashi has always a gaze. His eyes are always very deeply, attentively looking at what is happening. And this is probably the most characteristic thing of him since he was a child. He was always very deeply and attentively in search of something. He was born in a period in Japan, which was a very special one. It was the Meiji period. So Japan had been closed for, probably some of you know that, it had been closed until 1873. It had been closed for around 250 years, almost completely. So it was a feudal state. And yeah, well, we will say a bit that after, but for around 250 years, there was almost no contact with other countries. In around 1860s, the Americans arrived for purely commercial purposes. They obliged Japan to open the borders and to start trading with US. And immediately after, also France, UK, Russia and the Netherlands arrived. So in a few years, Japan finds itself involved in this international trade with countries which were already huge international military and economic globalized countries, and Japan was still a feudal country. Those countries were conquering the world, and the Japanese governor, in a very bright way, they understand that they were in front of only two possibilities. One was that they would get conquered like many other countries in Asia. The second is that they should become a powerful military and economic and political and technological and scientific country at the same level as America and Europe. And that's what they start. Really, it's a top-down process governed by the government, and which literally brings Japan in a matter of 70 to 80 years to become one of the biggest countries in the world. In this period of forced and very quick phase of modernization, they bring from the Western countries all the technological and military and scientific knowledge that they needed to make this big jump. And together with this scientific and technological knowledge from Europe, of course, also arrived the teachings of the materialistic and illuministic culture. And this is what Takashi starts breathing when he goes to high school and university. He moves from the little countryside to the city of Matsue, and then he is very much interested in science, because he's a person that always had a very strong interest in reason and in the truth. He always was searching for real truth. And what he learns from the Western culture is that science is an extremely powerful way to reach the truth. What he tells us about those years is this. All the texts that I will read from now on, it's his own words coming from his books. In my high school years, I had been drawn to materialism, so much so that when I began to study medicine, I was easily convinced that man is nothing but matter. During dissections of cadavers, the marvelous structure of the body, the perfection of the details, aroused my admiration. But what I touched was nothing but matter. So it seemed to me that there was nothing to worship in men. Life lasted only until the grave. Nothing wiser than to spend it in joy and happiness. Let us drink, let us sing, let us dance, let us play, before the blood of youth grows cold. Having no respect for the flesh, I had no qualms about defiling it. However, there was always at the bottom of my heart a vague restlessness that refused to subside. We find already in this sentence, we already see the entire humanity of Takashi. He was very much excited for science. He was very excited about what he was studying and the truth of science. He was surprised by the marvelous structure of the body, because he was a person always able to get surprised and marveled by what he was seeing. In fact, he was a very sensitive person. He used to love very much beauty and art and poetry. So he was a very sensitive heart. And he liked a lot having fun and having joy and dancing and singing. He was a person who really, really liked enjoying life. He was a very strong person. He was a very successful guy. He was a pretty handsome guy. So the kind of person that if you put him in a group, everybody was looking at him, noticing at him. He was a sort of, able to draw people after himself. The intuition of truth. Between the second and third year of university, my mother was hit by stroke. The instant I rushed to her bedside, there was still a breath of life in her. She exhaled, staring at me. That last look from my mother completely changed my view on life. The eyes of that woman who had begotten me, educated me, and loved me to the end, infallibly told me that her soul would remain with her dear Takashi even after death. I had a clear intuition that my mother's soul really existed. This is the moment when the life of Takashi starts to change. It's the same Takashi as before. He was looking for the same thing as before: truth, beauty, happiness. But now something different happens for the first time. And he let himself be completely changed by this happening. He has an intuition of truth to which he gives a lot of, he leaves space to this intuition of truth. What happens in this moment, he understands it's true, and he accepts this to completely change his view of life. He still, of course, struggles in understanding how this can go together with the passion he has for reason and for truth, because he had been taught until now that religion and reason, religion and science cannot work together. But he had irresistibly the perception, the clear perception, that both things were true. Reason and science are true, but also the soul must be true. Science and matter cannot be everything. In this, he meets his first friend. And this is crucial, because his life will always be accompanied by friends. All the journey that we will see from him always happened because he had someone aside of him bringing him to truth. It was never a discovery that he did on his own. Pascal, he read this book from Pascal, and Pascal was extremely interesting for him because he was a scientist, he was a philosopher, and he was a deeply religious person, and he was an inventor. So he was able to put together the dimension of science and the dimension of the spirit without any conflict. So by reading Pascal, he was told by Pascal, the heart has its own reasons that reason does not know. And he got convinced more and more by reading Pascal that birth and death must have a meaning. He's still the same old Takashi. He has a huge respect and faith in reason. And so he wants to treat also this intuition of truth with the same rigor of reason that he applies to science. And then he says, when I have to verify, to test my scientific hypotheses, I always have to verify them into experience. If I want to understand if this intuition of truth is true, I have to verify it into experience. And then he asks himself, what shall I do to verify into experience if faith is true or not? I have to try to live with people who have faith and see what it means. And then he just picks by chance a family. This is Urakami. By that time, he had moved to Nagasaki to attend the University of Medicine. And then he decides to ask a Catholic family to host him as a student, just to see from within what the life of Christians was. And he literally picks by chance the family, the house of the Moriyamas. He says that he had just seen it from the hill. It was a very nice position. And he had heard about the Moriyamas, which was a pretty famous family. And then he decides to ask them to host them. And the Moriyamas welcome him in his house. He's very surprised by what he sees. Urakami is the northern part of Nagasaki, which was mainly inhabited by Christians. Historically, for centuries, it had mainly inhabited by Christians, and that's why he decided to live there in that area of Nagasaki. What he learns by being in the house of the Moriyamas and in Urakami, north part of Nagasaki, is not only what he sees, but is also the stories that he hears. And now we will have to go very, very quickly on this, but I mean, this would really deserve a separate meeting. But he learns about the history of Christianity in Japan, which is, I mean, trust me, it's amazing. We tend to think that Christianity has nothing to do with Japan, but the history of Christianity in Japan is absolutely amazing. He finds out that in the 16th century, 1549, St. Francis Xavier arrives. After that, there is what is called the Christian century of Japan, So for around 100 years, the Jesuits, Franciscans, and Augustinians, and a few other priests from mainly Italy, Portugal, Italy, and Spain, they are in Japan. For the first 50 and 60 years, they are very well welcomed, and Christianity spreads very, very quickly. In something like 70 years, almost entirely the south of Japan converted to Christianity. And in 70 years, there were 600,000 Christians, including a lot of feudal lords. Out of a population of 12 million, 600 had become Christians in a few decades. Then, as it always happens, for political and social reasons, persecution starts. And the last 40 years of the Christian century is just horrible persecutions, to the point that Christians and foreigners overall, they are sent away from the country. Basically, the concern was that they put together Christians and merchants, and they had for them it was the same thing, and for them it was just the Western countries coming to conquest Japan. So at a certain point, they decide to kill everybody, or to just exile them. So all the foreigners are sent away or they are killed, and all the Japanese are forced to renounce to their fate. And if they do not renounce to their fate, they are killed. And if you have seen the movie, or I've read the book by Martin Scorsese, which was Silence, you have a bit of a sense of what happened there. In around 1644, they say that all the Christians had been completely cleared from Japan, or they had been sent out, or they had been cancelled, with tens of thousands of martyrs. What they didn't know is that there were still some people called the hidden Christians, which were hiding, especially in the area of Nagasaki, especially because they had left the city to escape, especially in the northern area of Nagasaki, which was exactly Urakami, where Nagai was. Those people had been there stayed there for 250 years without priests, without churches, because everything had been destroyed, without sacraments, only few thousands of them, something like in the beginning 2,000, 3,000, just transmitting the faith from generation to generation for 250 years. They had received a prophecy saying, after 7 generations, the priests will come back. We go back to what I said before. In around 1860s, the Americans arrive and they oblige Japan to open. Christianity was still prohibited. The Americans allow foreigners to settle in Japan in around 1860. Especially the French and British people go in the area of Nagasaki, the Americans go in the area of Tokyo. And together with them, some churches are rebuilt, only for the foreigners. Japanese people were still prohibited to go to the church. The people of Urakami had been waiting for 7 generations, those priests. They were not able to refrain from going to those guys and check if those were the guys of the prophecy. And actually 7 generations had passed. So after 7 generations, really the priests had come back. So the people of Urakami just came out and told them, we had been waiting for you for 250 years. And that's when basically they are caught by the governors again, and they are put in 22 war concentration camps all over the country and basically exterminated. This is called the last persecution of Urakami. Among these people, during those 250 years, the community of Urakami was always driven by a family, which was actually the Moriyama family. Takashi had went there and he had no idea where he had gone. And Midori was exactly the descendant of those guys. So when at a certain point in 1873, Japan, under pressure of the foreigners, removes the prohibition for Christianity, and then finally Christianity is allowed also to Japanese people. Then the people of Urakami who were in prison were allowed to go back to their village, and there were just a few people, and they restarted building Urakami. And among, one of the first things that they started doing was building the largest church in the East. And this was the church that Takashi was able to see when he went to Nagasaki. So this has been built by the grandfather of Midori, the father of the Moriyama people that Nagai went with, and by the survivors of these 250 years of persecution. And it was a huge, huge church. But what Nagai see, first of all, he hears about this story, which he had no idea. He remains completely astonished. But even more, what impressed him is what he sees in the people of Urakami and in the Moriyama family. Let's see what he says about the people of Urakami. This is just a few of the things that we can read in his books, but I try to choose the most significant. The day of the people of Urakami opened in prayer and closed in prayer. Their very life was a prayer, and there was no part of their life that was not in prayer. Whatever work they did or task they performed, they said a prayer before they started and one at the end. He met Franciscan priests and friars. Here, when he talks about his story here, he uses the third person, but he's talking about, this is Takashi. So he means Takashi. Takashi met Franciscan priests and friars. He had always assumed that churchmen must be foreigners, and was shocked to see that they were actually Japanese. The eyes of the friars were beautiful and bright, and they seemed to be looking at a different world than the one that ordinary people see. He realized that the economic utopia he had so longed for was being realized in Urakami without the need to engage in any class fight. What was different from the society that communism planned was that everything there was dominated by love. He understood that the church was a thriving reality pulsating with life, and that it was a mistake to treat it as a sampler of antiques belonging of the historic heretical sect of the Jesuits. About what he sees in the Moriyama house, Takashi stood listening, absorbed, and could sense the joy in the souls of those people. But at the same time, he could not help but feel a deep sadness for the misery of his soul that was so ignorant of the things of the spirit. He had no understanding of the purpose of existence and no established view of life and death, but was constantly anxious, plagued with complaints, dissatisfaction, and unhappiness. He knew that this condition was due to the fact that he had not known the true faith. The religion that the men in those villages followed had to be the one and only true faith, Takashi thought, because it could not be otherwise explained that so many people lived without the resentment of the death of all the ancestors who had given their lives to defend it. It is unthinkable that men would give their lives for a false doctrine. In this context, Takashi tries to more and more to search for confirmation of the intuition that he had, and he kept on his journey for becoming a doctor. The graduation arrives. He was a brilliant student, and he was asked to. He was one of the best students in the faculty, and the day of the graduation arrives. He goes out with his friends to celebrate, and after the celebration, after the party, he goes back home to the Moriyama house under the rain. He's completely wet, and he falls asleep completely wet. The morning after, he wakes up, and he has this terrible pain in his ear. Basically, he had developed, due to the rain, a very severe otitis, which soon became a meningitis. He's brought immediately to the hospital because he had to undergo surgery, and he's literally at risk of death. All of a sudden, he's risking death. He realizes that everything might finish from any moment. It's the second time that he faces death. For the first time in his life, Takashi experienced that in the face of unexpected misfortune, a man's ambition, plans, and dreams of glory can dissipate into nothingness, like a fleeting mirage that has no substance. But he also thinks, I'm going to become a doctor. A doctor who has not experienced the disease cannot understand the patient's heart and cannot devote himself to the patient with his whole self. The big dream of Takashi to become an internal medical doctor vanishes away because he remains a bit dumb on an ear and he's not able to use the stethoscope anymore. So he has to leave his dream of medicine. For the second time, he faces that. And for the first time, his big dreams of life crash down. Then he received a proposal to become a radiologist. Radiology had just arrived in Japan. In the Western countries had started since a few decades. And he was asked to start radiology in Japan. He was one of the very first. He knew that radiology was very dangerous because it was already clear from the first radiologists that many of them would die by the consequences of the radiations. This is what he's proposed because this is a job that he can do without using the stethoscope. The professor that invites him tells him, "I can promise you hard work and total incomprehension, along with a serious risk to your health. You will, however, be a Japanese pioneer in a vital science field. We will discover new truth that will last forever, because if something is true, it lasts forever." Takashi is super excited as the new idea, and then he decided to become a radiologist. He believes in science, he believes in the human progress, he believes in the great Japan, so he wants to devote himself to Japan. He believes in humanity, which is able to shape the future and to make good. And for this, he wants to give his life because he always thought that he wanted to reach truth and he wanted to devote himself to truth. And for him, science was the possibility to discover truth and to make something good for the good of humanity and for the good of his country. At the same time, in Moriyama house, he meets Midori. Midori used to live away because she was teaching away. He starts meeting Midori for the first time. On the Christmas of 1932, he's invited by the Moriyama family to attend the first Mass. Attending the first Mass for him is a complete change in his life. This is what he tells us of the first Mass he attends. That midnight Mass was a real mystery to him, which means to me. In the church is the living body of the Almighty. He had, all of a sudden, this intuition as he sat in the midst of the crowd of believers. But is man so tiny before the Almighty, so frail? How can he stand on his own feet, so small and helpless? He cannot indeed. Nothing is possible for him except at the hands of the Almighty's infinite love. In that moment, he understood that only by dying completely to himself could he be saved by the loving hand of the Almighty. The I is nothing in itself. It is only in God. It was only in direct relationship with God that he could gain eternity. It was only by transcending time and space that he could come to true life. For the first time, he very clearly perceived the presence of God in the church. So a few days after, he's called to go to the war in China. He's called to war in China. He had got to know with Midori. Midori had developed appendicitis, so he was able to bring Midori to a hospital and save her. The relationship between Midori and Takashi starts becoming very, very, very close, and they basically start falling in love almost immediately. Midori prepares a sweater for him, and he's leaving to the war, and Takashi thinks he will never go back. Midori sew the sweater to him and gives the sweater to Takashi, saying, "From now on, this sweater will protect the man who saved my life. And since it also carries all my prayers, it will also protect him from bullets. I'm sure that by wearing it, he will be able to return home, and then I will see him again." The war is a huge struggle for Takashi because Takashi believed in science, in the progress of humanity, in humankind, and in Japan. And in the war, he sees so many horrible things that all he used to believe in crushed. Midori sends to him a booklet, a catechism. And by reading the catechism, he says, I was able to find in that book all the answers to my struggle. Everything I believed in was not able to sustain the view of what I was seeing there. But in the catechism, it seemed that I could find all the answers to what I was looking for. Midori's heart went only to Takashi. And with all the ardor in her heart, she prayed to Our Lady to bring him home safely. Takashi, on the other hand, was more and more committed to his care of the war victims day after day. And more clearly, he could hear Midori's prayer reaching out to him. He comes back to Nagasaki, actually, because after 1 year, the end is over and he's able to come back. And he decides to get baptism and to marry Midori. He realized during the war that the only truth of life was in faith. It took him this couple of years to decide to, it was 2 to 3 years to verify the intuition that he had. He now realized that baptism Christianity is the only way. He takes no name of Paul and marries with Midori. They start a beautiful life together, even if at the beginning they were very, very poor. Takashi is very much into his job. More and more he's involved in his job, in his research, in his being a teacher at university, and in treating patients. He puts all his effort, all his heart. He's an extremely good person. They call him the good doctor. He tends to be completely absorbed by work. He's almost never at home. He's completely devoted to work. And Midori, in the meantime, this is what Takashi tells us about Midori. Takashi returned to work at university with a monthly salary of 40 yen, which was very little. Midori, on rainy days, worked on her sewing machine, while, when the weather was nice, she went out into the fields to cultivate a plot of land of less than 2 hectares. At the end of the day, she kept an evening school that she had opened to give lessons in sewing, handcrafts, and ikebana to young girls in the village. They had no difficulty eating, but they certainly could not afford to go out for recreation. Her fingers were all covered with calluses. They had a field of about 1,600 square meters where Midori grew mostly wheat and sweet potatoes. There were many women who laughed, pointing at her when they saw her carrying heavy buckets full of manure across the fields on her shoulders. As soon as she had a spare minute, she would knit and would not stop, even while talking to someone. Takashi looked at her and thought that those knitting hands were like her beating heart. They would never stop until the day she died. Midori was very, very silent. Nagai was becoming more and more famous as a radiologist, as a doctor in the community. He was a very popular person. Midori was very silently leading this life. There's an episode from Takashi and Midori that I want to tell you because I love it really, really very much. And it tells you who Midori was. One day, Nakamura, an assistant professor of anatomy, a friend of Takashi, a doctor, was at their home. And they were chatting about science. Takashi and Nakamura were touching about science, and Midori was sitting aside, very silently as usual. Nakamura, assistant professor of anatomy, had barged unexpectedly into our house, clutching his fan in his hand. He sat down to my right and began to talk about salamander eggs. He was conducting experiments on asexual reproduction, which means, reproduction like in the plants, without fecundation, just self-fecundation. The year before, he had been successful with frog eggs. That year, he wanted to try on mammals. My wife, Midori, was sitting as usual in the tatami room overlooking the garden, listening to our conversation as she was ironing shirts. Nakamura said, "Madam, apparently one day you will not need a husband anymore to have children." To which my wife, laughing, replied, "Oh, really? Well, anyway, the purpose of marriage is not just to make children." She had very clear in mind what was the purpose of marriage. And it's being companions, one to the other, to the purpose, to the meaning of life. The purpose of marriage, and this is not common in Japan, I can tell you. It's not about making children. It's about one being the vocation for the other. Company to the destiny, company to the meaning of life. This is how they were poses. Takashi spends part of his free time, almost all his free time, in charity, helping with the St. Vincent Society. So basically, he was never at home, or devoted to patients and students and science, or devoted to charity to other people. Another episode which is crucial for him, it's another turning point, is when one day he has an anaphylactic shock due to an injection for a normal flu. And after that, his life changes. And after that, his motto becomes, what is necessary is enough. This had become the motto that guided his everyday. What is necessary is enough. He had changed inside, in his soul. He had opened himself to a new horizon, realizing that the mere injection of 2 grams of a microbial extract had been enough to throw him to the brink of death. That conceit of being a great man, which until then had accompanied him, crushed to the ground like a balloon that suddenly deflates. The frailty of the flesh and the precariousness of the things of this world became a living experience. So more and more he experiences that life is precarious, that flesh is precarious, and that death is a living experience. And more he understands that he needs to find the real purpose of life. And then he's called again for the second time to the war. And this war is much worse than the first one. He spends 3 years in war. He takes part to 72 battles, and he's really alive by miracle. And the pages where he describes the war are incredible. The capacity that he has. The war is as bad as the first one, but he is different because now he is baptized and he has full faith. The ability that he has to make heroic acts to help the others, not only the Japanese, but also the Chinese, the enemies. He rescues also and takes care also of the enemies. The ability that he has to see, to notice any sparkle of good that is in the war is amazing. It's really a heart which is amazing. I want to read you 2 things about the war. First of all, he kept on asking. He was really convinced that he would die in this war, and he keeps on asking himself, what am I giving life to? What am I dying for? He prayed that his death would not be sensational, like the kind that ends up in the pages of newspapers, but that it would be quiet and full of meaning. He wondered what it was worth giving his life for. He came to understand that a small man like him could not make lofty speeches for the fatherland or for whatever, but that in the end, it was good if he could give his life for a little friend, one of those poor wounded soldiers. He keeps on repeating himself, the biggest love of all is giving your life for friends. And then I have to tell you one episode. One day he's in China, and for the first time after many years, he hears, it's Christmas, he hears the bells of the church toll. He has to go there, he wants to go to the church, but these are Chinese people. When the Chinese see him, they're completely scared. And then he takes out of his pocket a rosary, because he always had, during the war, the rosary with him. And then the Chinese people realize that his enemy, the Japanese, had the rosary, and they all claim in happiness because they realized that it was a Christian. He goes into the church with the Chinese, and he starts praying. Takashi entered the church and took his first communion in many months. He gave thanks for the grace that had enabled him to survive until that day, prayed for the souls of the thousands of young men who had fallen in battle, and begged that soon the world might return to peace. Moved by curiosity, children, women, Chinese, and the elderly entered the church and went to kneel all around him and began to chant in their beautiful accents the litany to Saint Mary the Virgin. The beauty of the choruses of hearts praying in unison caused Takashi to burst into tears. It was at that moment that he sensed in a glaring way that the peoples of the whole world could be united. It was only in the bosom of Christ capable of generating that unity in love, that it was possible to stop an incomprehensible war like that. Takashi survives also this war after really, really incredible episodes, and he goes back to Nagasaki. And he goes back again to the work as a doctor. The war goes on. The situation is really terrible. So he devotes completely himself to the patients. And this is what he says about his experience of being a doctor after the war and after his fate has flourished. The more experience I gained as a physician, the less confidence I placed in my own abilities, and more in front of the patient, I found myself nothing more than a trepidatious man. When I was visiting an elderly patient, I felt as if I were in front of my parents. When I was undergoing surgery on a child, it was as if it was my child. A physician does not just repair a body, how much it has changed from the beginning. Not only must the physician suffer in his heart along with the patient, he must also resonate with the suffering of the flesh and come to feel the pains of the body. When I realized that, in fact, it is God's will to determine the fate of the sick, caring for the sick became prayer. Giving an injection became prayer. Taking a fluoroscopy became prayer, to invoke God's blessing on the sick person. Takashi becomes more and more famous. More and more people come to him. He's one of the few doctors who has survived, and everybody goes for radiology to him because of all the injuries of the war, and because the new discipline is becoming more and more famous. He's a reference point for the entire community of the city. He takes having also public roles. He's very famous in the city. And Midori keeps with his own life. It was no small feat for Midori to take care of that husband. She had to look after the children when they cried. She had to make sure that Takashi ate enough, and she always had to keep an eye on him, otherwise he would forget his tie when he had left the house. And then she handled all the household chores without ever getting angry or complaining. So much so that you couldn't even tell what she liked and what she didn't like. He passed her the monthly paycheck of 100 yen, and Midori, in order to make ends meet at home, supplemented by going to teach ikebana, sewing, and tea ceremony at the factory's youth school, and working as a seamstress, making Western-style clothes. In addition to this, she had to educate children and manage her demanding public office as a chairwoman of the Union of Women's Association of 18 villages in Urakami. And when air raids occurred, she had to distribute emergency rice rations, provide relief, build defensive fortifications at the behest of the army, solicit collections of bond certificates and saving, and more. Definitely an amazing job for a lone petite woman. She was, again, very silently serving his family, Takashi, and the people of their villages. In June 45, Takashi is diagnosed with leukemia, coming from his job. He had devoted so much himself to the job of radiology that he develops a terrible form of leukemia. And they tell him, you have 3 more years of life. He understands that he's going to die and leave Midori and the children alone. He's completely scared. For the first time, he realizes that all he has given his life for is going to finish, because he's going really to die this time. He's very scared, and he goes to Midori. He told his wife that he had contracted an incurable disease and had only 3 years left to live. To that wife, whose only reward up to that point had been to be reduced to being so tiny. To that wife who had struggled so much with him in the vain expectation that one day he might become a professor and they would at least come to lead a life like others. Midori hugged the child tightly and stood still and listened. After he finished speaking, she stood there, still for a few moments, after which she got up, went to the little altar, lit a candle, and facing the crucifix began to pray. Takashi looked at her helplessly. His thoughts went to the Gethsemane, to the scenes of suffering and prayer on the eve of that, when Jesus, sweating blood, said, "Father, if you will take away this cup from me, though not mine, but your will be done." This woman, he thought, who until now has borne a great cross, from now on must bear an even greater one, because he has to die. His wife's back trembled in the candlelight as she prayed. Sorry, there's a mistake. It seemed to him something deeply sacred. She lowered her head, finished praying. She went to sit opposite Takashi and smiling said, "Whether we live or die, it is for the glory of God." Let's keep in mind this sentence, because from now on, Takashi is going to understand who Midori was. For the first time, Takashi is going to understand who Midori really was, and his life is going to change thanks to Midori. We are in June 1945. After 2 months, the bomb explodes. They had two children, two had died before. The two children that were out of the city, they had sent them away because the city was dangerous. On that day, on the 9th of August, the bomb falls down. Takashi was in the hospital, Midori was at home. I will show you now in silence a few pictures because they talk by themselves. This is the big church of Urakami, like you could see from, basically from home. This is Urakami, the area which had been the heart of Christianity for 250 years of the hidden Christians. And this is where he was working at the moment of the bomb. He was in this concrete building, and that's how he survived. He spends the first 3 days without being able to go away because all the few survivors were running to the hospital, and then he spends 3 days only trying to save those people. On the first day already, he says, Midori has not come to the hospital. He clearly understood that she had died because he was totally sure that if only she had been able to survive, she would have come to him to search for him. After 3 days, he goes where their house was. Little remained of my burned house. Now he talks in first person. There she is. I knew I would find her there. That black thing barely sticking out of the white ash, it was Midori. Among the remnants of the kitchen, next to the fragments of the cattle, all that remained of her were those bones alone. I reached out and touched her. They were still warm. I picked them up and how light they were. They crumbled into pieces. Next to the bones, her rosary chain, the one we see in the picture here, the real one. I placed her bones in a scorched bucket and, holding her tightly in my arms, headed for the grave. This is the most important passage. Here we have to understand what happens in the heart of Takashi. Nothing remained of the fruits of all the efforts of a lifetime, and all hopes for the future had become nothing. What have I lived for until now? And what will I live from now on? As I laid on the ashes, the darkness of night assailed me, and total despair fell on my heart. I fell into coma. So this is an experience that we all face in front of the adversity of life, in front of pain, suffering, disease. We hear a question arising in our heart. What is life for? What will I live from now on? How can I live in this situation? And desperation. And let's keep in mind these two things. One is desperation, and the other one is this question: what will I live for from now on? With this disease, with this adversity, with these issues, how can I live from now on? Takashi fell into coma. After thinking these things, he fell into coma. The morning after, in the middle of the destruction, he wakes up. When he regained consciousness, it was dawn. The sky was pale sprinkled white sprinkled with sparse stars, and Venus shone brightly above Mount Compira. Takashi gradually came back to himself in the cool morning breeze. He took out his rosary beads and knelt on the ashes to pray. Those ashes were the true testimony to the transience of man and all his works. All was silence. No sound or sign of life could be heard on the atomic wasteland. The sky to the east was getting brighter. It seemed as if the light of hope came to illuminate the darkness of despair. He stood waiting as his heart cleared. In the silence, he heard a powerful voice whisper, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." It was the voice of Jesus. So this is crucial. We need to understand what happened in his heart, because he was here. He had these two conflicting sentiments in his heart. On one side, there was the question, what will I live for now? Which is a question, it's an open question. What's the purpose of this? What's the meaning of this? How can I live with this? And the other thing is desperation. The point is that this requires a choice. It's a call to our freedom. Our freedom has to choose which one of the two is the truth. Is it our need for a meaning? Are we willing to give space to this question, what will I live from now on, or will I believe in desperation? Takashi had to decide, what was the true voice of his heart? Was it desperation? There's no more hope? Or was it this question, what will I live from now on? This is the decision of his heart. A whole life for ashes. He could not endure a meaningless life. He had to find that which does not perish. He had to cling to that which never dies. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. He had understood that what transcends time and space and remains forever is the word of Jesus Christ, who is God, the life in his word, the life with his word, the life that loves God and is loved by God, the supernatural life, the life of the Spirit. This is the true life that a man should live. He had lost everything, but he was entering his new life, searching for what he could never lose. Takashi understands that in front of this question, what will I live from now on? This is an open question that needs to find an answer. There must be something which is the real purpose of life, which never dies. The temptation for desperation is not true. My thinking that there is not a possibility of happiness in this situation is not true, because I have a question in my heart which really shouts, I need to find an endless meaning. I need to find eternity. I need to find what makes sense in this. And this is what he wants to find from now on. And then he realized who Midori was. Whether we live or die, it is for the glory of God. He realizes for the first time that he had always devoted himself for the good, for charity, for people, in faith. But in the end, he was always hoping his happiness from his own hands, from his own work, from curing the people, from charity, from what he was able to do. But all that he had done had become ashes. He had relieved on his own hands with a very good and sincere motion of the heart. But in the end, he thought that what would save the world and life was what he was building. He realizes now that what Midori had lived for entire life was just for his own vocation. His life was what Christ was calling her to. And the purpose of life is just devoting to what you are called to for the glory of Christ. It's not what you do, but it's why you do. Whatever we do is to give glory to Christ. And even if those things become ashes, the glory of Christ remains. Midori had died, but he had left testimony, eternal testimony of this. Her entire life was not to build something, but to testimony God. Until that time, Takashi had lived to build something, and that something had become ash. From now on, he understands that he has to live like Midori. He has to live, to devote himself as much as before, but not for what he's able to build, but for the glory of God. It's not about what you do, but it's about why you do it. This is what never dies, the glory of God that you can testimony in what you do. And then Nagai spends 2 months just curing people and going around in the cities around where people just escaped to try to treat the people. And then he decides to go back to Urakami because he needs to find the truth in the destruction. He needs to find what never dies within the total destruction. Where everything looks like that, he needs to find what is that never dies in there. On November the 23rd, he does a speech in the church because he's asked to make a speech, and he realizes what was the truth of the bomb. The bomb had dropped. What he realizes is, for him, it's very astonishing. The Americans didn't want to drop the bomb on Nagasaki. Their initial objective was another city, which was Kokura. And then on that day, it was completely, despite of the weather forecast, it was completely covered with clouds. Then they had to change to the second objective, which was Nagasaki. And then they wanted to drop the bomb in a different area of Nagasaki where there were the factories. But then there were again clouds that they were not expected, and there was an issue with the fuel. And then they just had to drop blindly by just randomly the bomb, and the bomb fell exactly on Urakami, which had been the place where Christianity was born, where Christianity was persecuted, and where Christianity was preserved in silence by the hidden Christian for 250 years. Now the bomb drops exactly on that people. And with this bomb, Japan decides to declare to submit to the Americans, and then the second war ends. Nagai says, with this last sacrifice of the people of Urakami, the Second World War ends. This is what he says publicly. On the morning of August the 9th, an atomic bomb exploded over the neighborhood. In an instant, 8,000 Christians were called by God to him. At midnight that night, our cathedral suddenly caught fire and was destroyed. At the same instant, at the Imperial Palace, His Majesty the Emperor made his decision known. On August 15, the Imperial Edict ending the fighting was officially promulgated, and the whole world saw the light of peace. August 15 is also the great feast of the Assumption of Mary. Not by chance was the Urakami Cathedral consecrated to her. Is there not a profound relationship between the annihilation of the Christian city and the end of the war? Was not Nagasaki the chosen victim, the spotless lamb, a holocaust offered on the altar of sacrifice, who died for the sins of all the nations during World War II? We are grateful that Nagasaki was chosen for such a holocaust. We are grateful because through this sacrifice, peace was given to the world and religious freedom to Japan. I'm over time, I'm sorry, but I cannot skip. Well, this I will skip. We will go back in the question Q&A maybe. Takashi starts working to rebuild Nagasaki together with his friends. And he starts, after a few months, he gets bedridden because he had leukemia. And then he says, what can I do? I need to be able to do something. Only my hands work, only my head are working, all the rest of my body is useless, I can only write. And then he decides to start writing books. With these books, he starts earning some money. The first thing that he wants to do with the money is to build 1,000 cherry trees in the atomic wasteland, because he knows that life can only restart from beauty. And then he uses all the money to support the rebuilding of the city, the church, the schools. His books become extremely huge bestsellers in Japan and above the world. He becomes extremely rich. He gives away everything because he doesn't want to keep anything for himself anymore. He wants to give everything for the rebuilding. He spends his first 2 years in a house which is 10 square meters, and then he wants to have a house which is smaller, which he calls the Nyokodo. And he wants to live in full poverty, earning a lot of money. He wants to live in full poverty and give everything away, because this is what he says. All this misery and suffering, it is as if rust had been deposited on our lives, as if an evil seed had taken root within us. We must scrupulously scratch away the rust and uproot the weeds that have grown inside us. I'm leading my own life of redemption here. This is the Nyokodo, the place of love to oneself. Nyoko comes from Nyoko Aijin, love the others like yourself. This is the place of love to myself. He understands that life can only restart if he finds the true love for himself, what is really able to fulfill his heart. He can only be able to bring something good if he finds what is the real meaning of his own life, what really makes his own life happy. Why poverty? This kind of life in poverty I lead of my own free will. I do not because I have to. There are those who have great possibilities and who can make a lot of money by working, which was his case. On the other hand, those who start out with limited potential are only able to work a little and consequently earn little. If everyone spends the proceeds of his work on himself, we end up with the former living in luxury while the latter struggle to survive. That would be unfair. If, on the other hand, we think that the only purpose for which some people are given so much is to put it at the service of the neighbor, that it can no longer be said that heaven's plans is unjust. And then he says this astonishing thing. The atomic bomb took away everything that stood as an obstacle in my virtuous path, and now I can taste true happiness. Because it's what I said before, he had devoted himself to building something which was not able to give him true happiness, because it was destined to become ashes. Thanks to the bomb and to the testimony of his wife, he understands this. The atomic bomb has brought away the falseness of his beliefs, and now he can really understand, he can really walk towards what never dies, which is true happiness. He can start experience true happiness. He says something which is incredible. He says, 5 years have passed since then, and our peace movement has never stopped. We have continued unabated to shout out loudly the value of that sacrifice, the sacrifice of the people who have died. But come to think of it, have we not failed in something in all of this? Haven't we, the survivors, been the ones who misappropriated the sacrifice of those hundreds of thousands who gave their lives in the atomic cloud to bring peace? In order to maintain the world peace that had been achieved by that sacrifice, the sacrifice of the dead people of Murakami, another new sacrifice would be needed. Prayers that ask for sacrifices without offering any of their own are just selfishness. Listen to this. The citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki prayed for peace, but what did they personally offer as a sacrifice for it? Beginning today, we must make a sincere self-reflection and offer another new sacrifice, greater than the sacrifice of the atomic bomb. Let it be the day of a new prayer. Let it be the sacrifice of changing ourselves, each for himself. This is the journey that he's leading in the Nyokodo. He understands that what he's called to is the conversion of his own heart. It's not about shouting against the Americans, we are the poor, we are the victims, but he says, now it's me who has to change. It's me who has to convert. These are just scenes of his children. What the biggest struggle, the biggest pain in his heart is that he knows that in a short time he's going to leave orphan his children. But he has such a strong confidence in the positivity of reality, like we said, even the atomic bomb, that this is what he writes to his children. Religion is not an opium. Faith does not serve to eliminate the suffering of the body and the pain of our soul. The journey that these orphans boys of mine will have to walk in the flesh will be full of toil and pain. An orphan's happiness lies in walking this pain of truth. Nagai knows that the only true way to happiness is reality as it comes. is finding what never dies in reality as much painful as it can be. And this is the outcome of his journey in poverty and in the sacrifice of his own desires and images, well, his images, and just to understand in the reality of the pain that he's facing in searching for God. This is what he gets to be able to say just before dying. The first thing I think every morning, as soon as I wake up, is that I'm happy. It is an achievement of the last period. So it's a long journey of sacrifice. It's a long journey of ascesis to get there. To find with surprise that every morning, as I lie in my bed, I'm filled with these expectations of joy as the day begins. I find that I have the heart of a child. We should turn our lives into poetry. We should let the poet's attentive and admiring gaze dig beneath the surface and glimpse the beauty that hides itself in each thing, and let it give shape to our actions and thoughts. I have finally reached this new horizon. Beating within my chest is a child's heart. The life of a new day awaits me. True joy in this bed of mine, 6 feet long that I cannot even leave, but it is life without the goad of duties and the ties of prohibitions that would stop the audacity of this heart that every morning sets to work anew. People go to visit him because he is the only source of light and hope in that city, in that total destruction. And people from all over Nagasaki, people every day, hundreds of people go and visit him. He has no peace. People write to him. He spends his day welcoming people, answering to letters and writing the books, because everybody wants to see this guy who is able to live joy and hope in this destruction. The Pope writes to him twice. The Emperor goes and visits him. Nobel Prizes, people of science, people of culture, politicians, everybody goes to visit them. That is a statue that comes from the Italian Association of the Medical Doctors, and it's now outside of the cathedral. Everybody wants to see this. This is what he says. What in the eyes of the world appears only as misfortune, for the saints is a grace, the place of the path to self-perfection. This is how he was waiting for that. Just imagine if one day an invitation arrived that you had been waiting for a very long time, from someone you had longed to meet, a person by whose side you had so long to stay, to spend a long time close together talking. On that day, on the day that the invitation arrived, how great would be your joy? That is God's invitation, and it is with this joy in my heart that I await it. When Nagai dies, there are 20,000 people attending his funeral. And when the bells toll during the Mass, all the bells of all the churches, all the bells of all the Buddhist temples, all the bells of all the Shinto shrines, all the bells of the factories of Nagasaki, at the same time, they toll to say hello to the great, to say thank and goodbye to their great citizens. Because Nagai had completely changed the city of Nagasaki, bringing hope and joy where only when people thought that only that had remained. And this is what he wanted to be written on the grave of Midori and on his own grave. I am Midori, I am the servant of the Lord, happen of me according to thy word. And on his own grave, we are useless servants, we did what we had to do. Sorry, I was long, but it's really difficult to cut such beautiful things.
Thank you, Gabriele. Now we have some time for questions. If anybody has questions, or I would ask Gabriele, if I may briefly, what
I would like to remove the slides. Sorry, how do I do that? Yeah, you can start with the question. Sorry. Yeah.
What has your experience been in this journey with Takashi and Midori?
You know, Takashi and Midori honestly have literally changed my life. Everything started with one sentence, which I didn't read to you because we didn't have time. And it is this one. It's not words by Takashi, but it's words in the book by Paul Green. But this sentence changed my life. We have suffered so much from the aftermath of the atomic bombing. we no longer need to think of ourselves. We have much work to do, each for what he can. And each of us, even those who are sick, can do something. For me, this sentence was crucial, because it came in a moment of my life when I was struggling. I had been struggling for quite some time, and I had been thinking too much of my own things. I had got lost in my own things. And when I read the story of Takashi, and I read this, it's not time to think of our own things anymore. I realized that I wanted to give entirely my life. I realized that by living for my own things, I was losing my life. I was wasting my life. So the first way Takashi changed my life was this: total dedication to the truth. It changed the way I use my time. I used to waste a lot of time doing nothing bad, but doing nothing good. I realized that I wanted to use my entire life and my time. I realized that my life and my time were not mine. And I had to use them not for my own things, but for his things, with a capital H. And then I started going deeper and deeper in this story, because this sheds so much light into my life. So this is about, it's about the true purpose of life, and using time and using energies and using intelligence and using affection to only find what really is worth in life, which is what remains and what never dies, which is leaving everything for Christ, searching Christ in everything. And it's not about what you do, it's just about why you do that. And you do it because for the true love to yourself. So this for me was the discovery of the true love of myself. The moment I realized what I really need, the moment I really started loving myself, I stopped living for myself, and I started using all my time for these things and for what I do. And now I don't waste time anymore. And if I do, I feel guilty, and then I restart. And this was not the case before. This, I think, is the biggest change that it brought to my life. I always say that after my vocation was born to Memoris Domini, this was the second time where my life completely changed. And it's the same thing that happened, actually. It's exactly the same thing, just in a different shape.
Thank you, Gabriele. Victor, do you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Gabriele, thank you so much. For me, perhaps one thing that was very struck me a lot, you said at the beginning of the presentation that at some point he was facing some materialism, some scientific, but even that he was not able to give up. That some doubts that okay, it's possible to believe.
So sorry, I cannot hear you very well. Can you get close to the mic? Sorry.
Of course. So in the beginning of the presentation, you said that he started to study at university, as many of us started to do it. So he was facing materialism, but he has something in his heart that he was not able to give up. Do you have an idea? How could you explain, or if there was a first encounter during his childhood, or during anything in his life that could explain this doubt, this gaze for meaning? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know. I honestly, I would say I don't think there was something special as big as some of the events that we have talked about, because Nagai was a very self-reflective person. He was very well aware of what happened to him. He would have told us. I think that reality in its daily, how it appears daily, is enough to awaken our heart. So that's our heart. Well, what he was feeling was his own heart as a human being. So even if he was trying to get convinced of himself that matter is everything, I mean, your heart tells you that's not true. And probably the normal things of life are enough, are enough to tell you that's not enough. At least Maybe you don't understand it, but at least you don't feel at ease with what you have, what we have. There's something at the bottom of our heart telling us, this is not enough, this is not enough. Always, this is not enough. This is what he had always felt. This is not enough. At a certain point, something big happens and makes you open your eyes. And then you realize, well, I need infinite. This is what happened to him. In the crucial moments of his life, he realized that he needed something which was infinite. Infinite happiness, infinite love, infinite justice. And not just a lot of love, a lot of justice, a fair amount of. If we live, because the balance of life is pretty okay, if we live convinced that a good amount of happiness and love and justice is enough, I think that still there's a voice in our heart telling us, no, that's not enough, that's not enough. But at a certain point, something happens which clearly tells you, no, that's not enough. Yeah, Mauro, I think you want to say something.
Mauro has a question.
No, finish, Gabriele, finish.
No, I just wanted to say one thing. There's one thing that Julian Caron always used to tell me and other people, which for me was very important. He always told us, guys, do we want to necessarily wait for the heart attack to understand these things? This means that we often understand those things when the heart attack happens, but it also means that we don't need necessarily to wait for the heart attack. Nagai, for quite some time, had to wait for the heart attacks, the death of his mom, the first disease where he was almost dying, the second one where he was almost dying, the first war, the second war. But we don't need to wait for the heart attack. The daily life is enough to start this journey, because there's always something within ourselves telling us, what you have is not enough. Mauro, please.
Hi, Gabriele, how are you? No, just wanted to ask you, you told us just a few minutes ago how the encounter with Takashi has somehow made you rediscover your vocation. You're living your vocation in Tokyo, not in a different situation, in a very, very challenging environment. You're alone. There isn't a house of memories there, and a very small community in a city of 30 million people. So I'd like to ask you two questions which are related somehow. One is, for example, that rediscovery of your vocation. How is it helping you in your daily job? You have been working for years in pharmaceutical companies, but you're a doctor. How is it guiding? How is becoming the source, the genesis, the origin of your action, of your position in front of reality? And the second question is, in an environment like Japan, the friendship of those people around you, of the community and so on. I know, for example, that the community has been seriously impacted by the discovery of Nagasaki when you went to Nagasaki together. Sorry, discovery of Takashi when you went to Nagasaki together. What does it mean living the friendship in a city like, the companionship in a city like Tokyo for you, from your experience?
So, before any reasoning, the beginning was that by reading Nagai, I was flooded by desire to have the same life as him. That's the beginning. And this was the beginning of when I met the movement. And this happened to me when my vocation was born. And this happened to me when I met Takashi and Midori. So before I could even realize what happened to me, I started like desiring this infinite happiness and love and justice and friendship, like I could see in Nagai. So I could not refrain from wanting it. It was really like an atomic bomb exploding in my heart. That was the first thing. And then of course there was a lot of a journey of understanding what was happening to me, and And then, yeah, I realized that what I realize is that I don't care anymore about obtaining in life what I want. I mean, I want to get what I really want, not what I figure. I don't care about at all anymore about what I figure, because I realized that my happiness is really somewhere else. So I don't have the problem of changing what's around me anymore, because this is what they taught me. I don't, because I mean, he lived in the worst condition that you can, it's this condition he lived is even worse than what we could ever imagine. So I don't care about what happens anymore. I just want to find true happiness in there, true friendship in there, true justice in there. What I realized very well is that we are not fair with experience often. Sorry, I should not say we, I should talk about myself, but I think that it's we. There are some other people who might share the same experience. So we tend to think that when we struggle, this is like an objection to our happiness, as if struggle and pain could not coexist with happiness. Because we are told by our society that being happy means having no troubles. I have realized that that's not true. That's not true. It's not about getting rid of problems. It's not about getting rid of issues, of tiredness, of struggles. Those things are there. You can be profoundly, deeply happy in those things. And that's actually the most desirable thing. Being able to be happy in any condition and not needing to change. So there's many things I'm struggling here with. First of all, being alone. But I don't, I mean, at least for now, I hope God will keep a hand on my heart and keep him in the same awareness as now. I realize that the point of my life is not just easing the conditions and changing the condition. I need to find what never dies in there. And this for me has become this urgency of finding what never dies like him, for me was the possibility to rediscover the heart of my vocation, which is just my personal relationship with Christ. And that's what I have rediscovered. And for me, these years have been as beautiful as the first years of novitiate, which were, I mean, like being completely in love, just falling in love with the person you love. So, yeah, for me it's this. So for me now, this, whatever the situation is, for me it's just about me and my personal relationship with Christ, and that's enough. That's enough. The circumstances are the possibility to live that. The difficult thing is living the life at that level, keeping your heart at that level. And on this, I learned what is the purpose of the company. What my life needs is my personal relationship with Christ. But then what's the point of the company? Without the company, I'm not able to stay at that level. Life brings me away. In our houses, we have written, the house is the place of memory. I would say that our company is the place of memory. The meeting we are doing today is the place of memory. It's through things like this, it's through our company, our being together like this, that my heart is able to be at that level of deep desire and urgency and need, where I can be face to face with Christ. Without the company, I get distracted and I get brought away by the things like Takashi. Without the company, I would get lost in very good things. Huh? I would start spending my time doing beautiful things, I can tell you, because I'm not a bad guy. I'm a good guy by nature. So I would dedicate myself to friends, to maybe doing some charity, to going to museums, studying beautiful things, but just for the purpose of those things. And those things will become ash. And those things, if you think carefully, are already ash, unless they're the place where you can be face to face with Christ. In order to live reality at that level, I need the company. And this is what our friends here are for. That's been my experience.
Thank you, Gabriele. Anybody else? Yes, can you come here, Davide? Closer to the technology.
Guys, tell me if it doesn't make sense. Let's make it friendly and not academic, please.
There is a question from Valerio. Valerio.
No.
Yeah, no, there is a question online.
Yeah. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really interesting. I just have a question. Since I study physics, I'm actually interested in the scientific part of life of this person. So I just want to know which role played science in the late part of his life. Whether, if you tell me more about this part of Takashi's life.
Yeah. So science is crucial in the life of Takashi. When you read about his life in his own words, sometimes you also have an impression that he's really exaggerated. So he was really a nerd for science, for radiology. But sometimes you feel, come on, this is too much. This is too much. The point is that in the beginning it was science, science, and science. And after the bomb, what he realizes, science becomes one of the main ways in his life to search for the truth. So the point is that Nagai has a very clear perception of how God has come to fulfill your heart. So if you have a passion in your life, you have to pursue and follow that passion. So Nagai devotes himself completely to what he's passion for. This you clearly understand by reading his word. He doesn't want to renounce to what he loves. He wants to. He's very much into what. So after the bomb, he gets more and more into science. He's crazy. After the day of the bomb, he's together with the day of the bomb. He's in front of the total destruction. After a few hours, he's talking with a few doctor survivors, and then they try to understand what happened. Because for us, it's obvious that it was the atomic bomb. They didn't know it was the atomic bomb. For them, it was just a huge bomb. And they didn't know that in Hiroshima 3 days ago, before it was the atomic bomb. So at a certain point, they start looking at everything, and they realize, oh, guys, this was the atomic bomb. They have really been able to do it in the end. And then he tells us, he gets immediately excited, and then he says, he rose up and he said, guys, we are the first humans in the history who will be able to describe the effects of the bomb. He was a specialist of radiology, so of nuclear science. I will be the first doctor, specialist of the atomic science, who will be able to describe this thing in humanity. He got so excited, and then he starts studying a lot about this. So for him, his own passions are crucial, and this is a message to everybody. Christ doesn't want us to live away, to put away our desires. We can only discover who is him if we go deep and deep in our passions, in our desires. We have to dig there, because if life attracts us there, it means that you will find him there more than in other places. That's why he attracts you there. This Takashi had very, very clear. So for him, it's not that science is the way to God because you can demonstrate God scientifically. No. The path that we have to walk to understand who we are and who God is following the path of what makes our heart beat. And for him, science was super important. So after he realizes that he has to find what never dies, which is Christ, the only purpose of life, he wants to understand what Christ is in science more than before. So he was incredibly human. So science for him, it was crucial. So yeah, if someone here is into art or into whatever, then the journey to discovering who you are and who Christ is there. It's our passions. That's super beautiful. This is what Giussani always told us. Does it make sense, Valerio?
Yeah, a lot. I agree as well. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
It has been extremely interesting. So there are so many things that I got struck by. So I'm sorry if I may just ask a couple of questions about some details that of the presentation that struck me as well. So first of all, just related to what you just said, maybe just since his mind was very scientific, did he ever, like in his books, speak about doing kind of experiments, how to understand more God and to understand if the Christians are right? Because that was the way kind of science would make you think about discovering things. Second question is about. I was also very struck with the fact that even the emperor goes and visit him when he's sick. So how that was presented to the public, because it's the same emperor that decided to start the war. How was that presented to the same emperor who started the war, and so many people lost their life for him? Just go to this doctor, Christian doctor, who is not even traditionally is following the rules of Japan traditionally, who is speaking about peace, and of course he did a lot of good in his life, but I'm really surprised that even the emperor got to visit him. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got the second question, but so regarding the first one, I think that he was very, very simple in approaching it. So, but in the end, the way we discover and we discover faith is the same as the scientific approach, because the scientific approach is the proceeding of experience. So you have an hypothesis, you look at reality, you look at things. I'm talking about an experiment. So you make an experiment, you look at something, you look at it asking yourself, what's happening there? What's happening there? At a certain point, you have an intuition and you build an hypothesis. And then the experimental method of science, as it was developed in the Western countries, which by the way are Christian countries, it means that after you have an hypothesis, you have to go back to reality and check if the hypothesis is confirmed by everything or if it is negated by anything. If you have even one proof against, the hypothesis is wrong. If the hypothesis is not able to take into consideration everything, the hypothesis is not good enough. So faith is the same. You look at life, you want to understand what life is, who you are, what's the purpose of life, why friendship, why working, why suffering, why being happy. You want to understand the meaning of all these things, and so you go out in life trying to find a solution. At a certain point, you have hypotheses, you have intuition about what could be the meaning of life. Then you have to test them in experience. Is it true or not? So this is what he did. At a certain point, he had the perception that the soul must exist. And then he reads Pascal, and Pascal tells him things which are extremely convincing. And then he said, okay, let's do like in science. I go where life is, where faith is being lived with Christians, and I see if what I see there corresponds to what I'm looking for or not. And then he realized it's a correspondence between our reason and what you see in reality. And that's what happened to him. In the end, it's the same as the experimental model. I mean, Giussani always told us faith has to prove its truth in the experience. Because if in experience you don't find faith useful to live your life, you can say whatever you want, but you will not even believe in faith. So for Nagai, it was the same. I have to go with Christians and see if what I see there makes sense to the intuition that I had. And if this makes sense with my understanding of reason, of science. And it did. The more he saw, the more it made sense. And then he goes in the war. And what the belief he had before didn't make sense in that context because everything was falling apart. And still Christianity was able to give sense to that. So life is a continuous confirmation of this and the continuous confirmation of the, in the end, it's the experimental method, it's experience. Regarding the emperor, so yeah, the emperor goes and visits him. Nagai became extremely famous in Japan. In the years after, many of the key quotations from Nagai about peace became part of the books of the compulsory school in Japan. My friends in Japan who are my age, they remember studying sentences from Nagai in the books when they were a child. So what Nagai was able to testimony and bring to the society was so true and so clearly and so not confessional, even though he was clearly Christian, but it was so true for everybody that he was able to unify people. He had a lot of people against, but that was the ideology of the pacifists that wanted just to hate the Americans. And he was basically saying, no, it's not about hating the Americans, it's about changing our heart. But Japanese are more, in Japan, there's not much ideology like in our countries because they didn't have Illuminism. So Japan are very open to what is, when they see something which is good and true, I can tell you they recognize it. So Nagai has a lot of people who esteem him and appreciate him hugely, even if they're not Christians, because Nagai was so clearly human and good. So yeah, the emperor went there and it was a huge thing, the emperor going there. He did everywhere in Japan. Immediately after the war, the government of Japan instituted a prize for a big, how did they call them? Like, you know, servants of the country. The first year they awarded it to 2 people. Nagai was one of them. And this came from Tokyo, from the government. So Nagai was a huge thing in Japan. And all over the world.
Do we have? Do you have 2 minutes for another question?
It's a very quick question.
I have time. I have time, guys.
Mother, there were 2 children that survived, and of their children, I know they only died in the last 20 years. Do you know, did they remain Christians, and what type? Because to have these parents is a huge legacy on your shoulders, the way people would look at you after. Do you know anything about their children, the son and daughter that survived?
So they were Christians, and they were actively involved in the church. The father, the son, Makoto, took care of the Nyokodo, the house, which is already available and you can visit, and opened the museum in memory of the father. And now this is managed by the nephew of Nagai, the grandchild of Nagai, who is the son of his son. And I'm in contact. I've met him several times. He's not happy at all about the beatification process of the grandfather, even less about the grandmother, because we are the first one who started talking about the grandmother. But this is a different story, even though he's Christian and actively involved in the church. For them, it's about peace. Like the message of his grandfather and his father was more peace. I think Japan has not realized yet in many cases, in most cases, how big this testimony of faith is. So the children has a huge esteem of the father and of the grandfather, and they're trying to keep the heritage alive, but they're not doing that much. For them, it's more of a local thing. You know, we heard from cardinals and bishops. Cardinal Scola, who is one of the biggest cardinals in the church, he said, this is one of the biggest saints that the church has ever had. Father Lepori, who is the general head of the Cistercensi, of the Cistercians, the world head, he said, his autobiography, I compare to the Confessions of St. Augustine. So I think it's more in the Western countries that we are realizing how big this story is. Japanese are shy people. They don't like being on stage under the spotlight. But yeah, so they were and they're Christians, but they're not completely happy with what we are doing. The grants.
Yeah. Thank you, Gabriele. I would just conclude saying that, yes, for me, these two people are friends. So I can only say I've been really moved by their humanity. They are true human beings. Is there any way, as we finish, to follow the association, Gabriele? Is there any way to
Yeah,
follow?
let me just share the. So on the website, you can find, first of all, you can find the prayer. And if you're willing, we can finish by reading the prayer together. So you can find on our website the prayer in English. So this is the website, Amici Nagai. So please go visit it and register to the newsletter. There are books which we have translated. These two are available in English. Thoughts from Nyokodo, which is self-published on Amazon, so you can easily find them on Amazon. And I strongly suggest you that you should read it. And also The Past of the Virgin, which is the story told by Nagai about the last hidden Christians of Murakami, so the family of Midori, basically. And this is beautiful. There are more books in Italian. So I know there's quite some Italians there. So Thoughts from Nyokodo is Pensieri dal Nyokodo, but Italians should really read Ciò che non muore mai, What Never Dies. And that is also available in Spanish down there, Lo que no muere nunca. And yeah, just become part of our friendship. So at least register to the newsletter, spread the website, spread the books, let people know about this, because I can tell you people need to hear this story, because this is literally changing the life of many, many people. We also need financial support, I have to say. So you can do donations on the website. They would be very, very welcome, because the amount of expenses that we have are a lot. And yeah, and that's, I think, all I would say. So if you want, we can finish with a prayer.
Can we say the prayer together? Yeah.
Yeah. Shall I read it? Do you want to read it?
Yeah, you do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
O merciful Father, who never leave your children alone on the journey of life, we thank you for giving to all believers and to the whole world Paul Takashi Nagai and his wife Marina Midori. Midori, after leading her bridegroom to the friendship with you, in humble dedication to her vocation, showed him the way of perfect charity. Together, in trusting abandonment to your will, they have given their face to the good that your providence knows how to draw even from evil, and have become the announcement of hope and testimonials of charity for the wounded people. After the death of his bride, walking in deep poverty of spirit, Takashi experienced in the atomic desert the tenderness of your friendship, and witness of grace and of the hundredfold, he regenerated in his people the taste for life and the courage to rebuild. Grant us all, through the intercession of these spouses, the grace to respond to our personal call to holiness. And grant us, if it is to your great glory, the grace that we are imploring. In the hope that these spouses may soon be counted among your saints. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen. Thank you, Gabriele. Thanks, Gabriele. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Gabriele.